Hi, I'm Trevor Mueller, the writer of Albert the Alien, Nexus Point, Repossessed, and now Los Ojos, which is available on Zoop. You can find me at trevoramueller.com or Trevor A. Mueller on all your favorite social media websites. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined by one of only two people that have ever been on this show in either podcast format or video format 9 times. The only other person that has physically been on this show the same amount of times as our amazing guest here today is Dirk Manning. You've seen him repeatedly on this show, and you've seen this guest repeatedly on this show. And I say this out of love because they are both two very extremely talented people. But this person, this guest today, has still, in my 15-year history, the longest interview I've ever had on Two Geeks Talking at 4+ hours. Without further ado, we are joined by the ever-talented Trevor A. Mueller, of course, from Nexus Point, Repossessed, and his newest comic series called Los Ojos. I'm horrible at names, but if I hit that, awesome. How are you doing today, Trev?
I'm doing great, Kurt. Thanks for having me. The longest running interview on your podcast is a point of pride for me. It is something that I brag about, although I don't know if I should. It's a wonderful thing. The new title, you were very, very close. Los Ojos. It's Spanish for the eyes. The full title is The Eyes of the Dead, but the eyes was not a very attractive and eye-catching title, as you will. And at the time I was coming up with the title, I think I was watching a lot of Robert Rodriguez action movies, Desperado, right? I was like, oh, you get the idea of what it is, and it's also in another language. So why don't I just try doing that with very simple word, Los Ojos, the eyes, which is also relevant to the story. So we tried going with that.
Hey, titles are hard, just making comics is hard. And the fact that you've been doing it for a number of years as your repeated guesting on the show, which is a wonderful point of pride in my own opinion, because you are so talented in many different fields. When you came to me with this particular comics series, this is a new genre for you. I love it. I always jump ahead of myself as I do because I know we could talk for hours about you, about your creative endeavors. But for those that don't know anything about yourself as a creative person, tell us who you are and what you're bringing to Two Geeks Talking today.
My name is Trevor Mueller. I have been a comic book writer going on almost 20 years at this point. I have started to dabble into film and prose novels as well. I did a comic book series called Albert the Alien back in the day, which was the first syndicated young readers series on Mark Waid's Thrillbent website. We got nominated for 2 Harvey Awards for that series. Since that time, I have done a lot of indie and self-publishing. I've gotten published in a handful of anthologies, and then I had 2 series picked up in the same year on Webtoon's original series. So the publisher side of Webtoon, not the canvas side where anyone can upload. That was Nexus Point, which is a cyberpunk action story about hackers fighting bounty hunters, and Repossessed, which I consider to be a supernatural workplace comedy. Webtoon really struggles with how to classify Repossessed, but it is about college kids working at a pawn shop that sells demonically possessed items. It's a love letter to 1970s and 80s era horror stories, embracing the fact that they are silly by today's standards. Repossessed and Nexus Point are completely free to read online through Webtoon's website. What we are here to talk about today is my new series, which is my first straight horror action book, Los Ojos, which is also my first mature reader's long form story. So very excited for that one.
From what I've read, it's beautiful, interesting characters. It has a dark, gritty feel. It has almost a feel of like Supernatural meets Dawn of the Dead meets any amazing media that I loved back in the 90s and 2000s. And I have to ask though, how did this process and comic come about? And who's this incredible team that besides yourself on this?
Let me answer the second question first, because I'm very proud of the team that we have on this book. Francesco Iaquinta is my artist on the series. He has been doing the art from the very first issue, which actually came out like 7 years ago. And we'll dive into that one in just a second. But Francisco's artwork has just been completely stellar on it. He introduced me to a fantastic colorist, Marco Pagnotta. Both Francisco and Marco are Italian. They live in Italy, and Marco's colors just really pop. And it was something very different from what I've seen in typical horror stories. So I really enjoyed the way that he just enhanced Francisco's artwork. And then we got Taylor Esposito on the letters, which Taylor's body of work speaks for itself. He has been an incredible collaborative partner as well, especially with the amount of and style of bubbles and narrative captions and everything that we kind of have to juggle within the confines of the story. To your first question, how did this story kind of come about? I came up with Los Ojos probably 7 years ago, and we had pitched it to a publisher that doesn't exist anymore. And it was always intended to kind of be a single issue, one and done story. It's like John Wick meets John Constantine. It is a action horror story about a contract killer that when he looks people in the eyes in Los Ojos, he does not see them as human. He sees them as angels or demons. And on his latest hit, he encounters something he's never seen before, and it changes his life forever. So you have this character who has a very binary view of the world, right? Very good and evil, very black and white. I always like to throw curveballs to my characters. And because we had set up the first issue to kind of be a standalone story, but we left it open for potential sequels, I had to think of what is that next curveball that we throw to this character. And it took about 7 years for me to answer that question. The answer ends up being, well, what if he ends up becoming a surrogate father? And so kids kind of run on the chaotic neutral scale, right? Like they are not malicious, but they can be sources of frustration, especially if you are not prepared for this. And for somebody who has a profession like a hitman, where you have to be at the top of your game for mental acuity and physical prowess and all of these things, if you're not getting a good night's sleep every night, if you're not able to kind of focus and concentrate, if you're not able to get your workout in, then how do you kind of deal with those types of situations? And how does your view of the world in this good and evil binary sense get thrown that curveball? That was part of what I kind of pitched over to Francisco, which is what if this hitman becomes a family man? And he's like, I love this idea. And I was like, cool, here's the curveball as well. It's not one more issue like the original. It's like 15 more issues. And so what we're putting together right now on the Zoop campaign is a 132 page full color graphic novel. It's got the original story that we did 7 years ago now in color, and then it's got the continuation of that story in this first volume. And the intention is that we would collect, if this story does well, then we would collect parts 2 and part 3 in a graphic novel as well. And part 2 is actually almost done. So we're ready to go on that one. We're just waiting to see how this campaign funds, and then also obviously to get this campaign out into the world. So really, really long answer to your short question there. But Los Ojos it's a point of pride for me. It's not an area that I have played in before, horror and mature readers kind of stories. And so this was an opportunity for me to kind of flex a new muscle and really challenge myself to tell a deeper kind of story, a more nuanced kind of story, and one that hopefully is much more rewarding to older readers than the type of stories that I've told before.
The genre can be difficult to write for, I'm sure. You're a well-versed writer. You said you wanted to stretch your muscles creatively for this. Were you getting a little not tired of the genres you were working in, but did you just need a change of pace? Was that kind of the reason why?
It really kind of stemmed from a challenge that I encountered with the Albert the Alien books. So with the Albert the Alien books, right, we were targeting all ages readers, but our core demographic was kind of readers 8 to 12. And when volume 1 of that series came out, it took us about 6 years before volume 4, the finale, came out as well, because we were updating that as a web comic series. It was updating 2 or 3 times a week. Going on 6 years, we made over 800 pages of content. But 10-year-olds that were reading us when volume 1 came out were now 16. And they're like, hey, I want to keep supporting you, but like I've kind of aged out of Albert. I would like something that's more my speed. What do you got for me? And I didn't have anything. This was, for me, an opportunity to kind of diversify what I had been writing. A lot of my time and effort and focus had really been on one series, Albert. And now it was an opportunity for me to start to juggle multiple series at the same time. And so I had pitched a number of things to Webtoon. I knew that they had a very strong teen audience. There was a lot of variety in the types of stories that they allow on those platforms. So I had sent them maybe 12 pitches. And I was like, based on conversations we're having, based on where I think your platform wants to go and based on what you're telling me you want your platform to use to grow, here's 12 ideas. 3 or 4 of them were actually like fit for platform, and the rest of them were just like, hopefully this will tide you over while I come up with more ideas that are actually fit for platform. And naturally, they gravitated first towards one that was definitely not a good fit for platform. And that was a really surprising answer to me. And we tried to develop it. We tried to kind of nuance it into what they wanted. But ultimately, at the end of the day, what they wanted for their platform was not aligned with the kind of story that I wanted to tell. And so we dropped that one. And instead, they greenlit Nexus Point, which was fantastic. I was excited. We were 2 months into production on Nexus Point. Then they came back and said, hey, we'd also like to greenlight Repossessed. And I was like, great, fantastic. I've learned a lot in these last 2 months. And so I took a lot of those learnings and applied those to Repossessed as well. And all this was happening 2020, 2021. So either right early into the pandemic or right after the pandemic started to lighten up. I also started to juggle with what are some additional stories that I wanted to tell. Los Ojos, because my life changes, like I have kids now at home.
Yeah.
That had really inspired this curveball and this opportunity to kind of nuance, because I think it's different when it's your kids versus like when it's somebody else's kids and you've kind of inherited it. And just going through the mentality of the character, right? Like he's not ready to necessarily be a father, but recognizes that there's desire to be there. And so I liked those nuances. I liked those curveballs to kind of throw at that character. And so Los Ojos became a focal point. And then I started to write like 1 or 2 other mature readers' books too, just because at this point I was like, why don't I just have something for everything? For everybody on my table. I've got stuff for kids, Albert. I've got stuff for teens with the Webtoons books, and now I've got stuff for grown-ups who want that more mature kind of layered stories that you can't necessarily fit into those other age groups. That was really the impetus behind it, and it was an opportunity for me to challenge myself to write differently, to write different types of characters and stories, and to flex those new muscles that I hadn't necessarily put in. I mean, we've had elements of horror, like there's a Halloween story in Albert the Alien, right? Like there's elements of horror in there, but it's very sanitized. This was me being like, what makes something mature readers? What is something that makes it R-rated? And I just made a checklist, and then I proceeded to check every box on that list. So.
But that's got to give you a little creative boost, especially after all that you've done here. The fact that you've put together a checklist, because I know you're a very organized person, and I'm sure you don't go into any project without said checklists or multiple checklists and tabs in an Excel sheet. I'm sure comes back to it. You wanted to do something different. You've accomplished that so far, and you're continuing to push yourself on a creative level so that you can provide this for everyone. But when you look at the characters that have been designed and that have been created here, do you have a favorite? Is there a certain character, either main character or a supporting character, that you'd I really love writing this character, but here's why?
Well, within Los Ojos, there's a character that I did not like when I originally developed them. And they were intended to kind of be the butt of a joke. And that was who I call the clown-faced woman. So the clown-faced woman is a little bit of a nod to Harley Quinn, who at the time when I was starting to write this was really gaining in popularity and had become kind of this anti-hero. And I had grown up with Harley Quinn in the Bruce Timm animated series where she's Joker's sidekick, and then eventually she kind of grows out of being Joker's sidekick and then kind of goes off on her own and does her own thing and becomes this sympathetic villain, but still a villain. And this love of Harley was like very confounding to me, where like they had kind of created Harley to be this character that I don't associate with her having been. And so I decided to make this character who was just going to show up and kind of like get killed off. And then as the story started to progress organically, like she started to play a larger and larger role in the story. And I was like, damn it, I have fallen into the exact same pitfall that I feel like the Harley character's kind of fallen into. And she has started to become this favorite character to write because she's unpredictable. And that's the thing that I really liked about this particular character. And that's one of the things that I think attracts people to Harley, is that she's kind of, again, chaotic neutral. She is unpredictable. She might do things that are good because she feels like it. She might do things that are awful because she feels like it. Her motivation can change at the flip of a coin. And that, from a writing perspective, became very fun for me within this story. She shows up in the second chapter of Los Ojos. So the first chapter of this new story. And again, was intended just to kind of be this throwaway character. And as the story starts to progress, like she starts playing a bigger and bigger role in unraveling some of the lore in some of the backstory that's going on and in exposing some of the things that are going on with some of the villains in the story. Does so in a way that I think is a breath of fresh air among the other characters that we have within the story. So she's again like a supporting character that was just kind of like a fun surprise to write. Andres's journey has always been the fun one for me because that's the one that requires the most attention and the most detail since he's the POV character that we have. And Andres is the POV character. We start to kind of see that he may or may not be a reliable POV character, right? Like in this first volume, it was really intended to be themed around how does Andres see the world? And as the story progresses, I don't know how far you got into reading it, but even within that first chapter, you start to realize that there might be something else going on here. It might not necessarily be that demons walk among us. Andres may have a difficulty with his grip on reality. This is a fun dynamic to kind of play with within the story. And so within this graphic novel, too, we juggle multiple narrators. I'm sure you've seen that some of the issues have like a couple of different narrative boxes that are coming in from different narrators in there. And that was done intentionally because Andres narrates, there's a third party kind of narrator, and then there's sometimes the supporting cast kind of narrating. And through these different perspectives, you start to unravel what is actually happening in this story. And that was a lot of fun for me. And that was something I've never tried to do before, and something I think would be very difficult to do for like a young adult, middle grade, or all ages story.
And that's what I found interesting is you're weaving so many different tales, not only through the narration boxes, but you're also doing it through the characters themselves. And yes, I have read up to the clown face woman, and I've interacted with that portion of it as well. So I'm excited about continuing on from that point to really dive into what she's accomplishing in your story here. But you're taking an interesting twist of the horror genre. You're making it something a little more unique, a little different. I mean, it's still familiar because it's the horror genre, but you're at least giving it a breath of fresh air, as you mentioned. But I'm enjoying it because horror is not my thing. Like if I see a horror film or if I have to review something that's horror based, it just doesn't always do it for me. But when I read a comic like what you've put together with this, I'm engaged in it. My alarm popped off like 10 minutes before. It's like, oh, you have an interview with Trevor. I'm like, damn, I want to keep reading this. I almost didn't want to interview you at this particular time. I'm like, Trevor, give me an hour. I'll be right back with you. But so I love what you're doing. I'm excited to finish off the rest of the story here. And I'm glad to know that you have 2 and 3 coming out soon, hopefully soon after that, because I'll be first in line to grab that. So
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and depending on how the campaign does, I mean, we'll definitely do a volume 2. If the campaign does well, we'll do volume 3. If not, we'll wrap it all up at the end of volume 2, right? Like, so we'll make sure that everyone gets an ending. I don't like to leave things hanging no matter what. There'll either be a volume 2 or there will be a volume 2 and 3. So we'll see how it goes. But please pledge, and that will help us to get to all 3 volumes. The thing that I really like as well about the horror aspect, right? The thing that you were just talking about there is that because we added in the action piece, John Wick meets John Constantine, I do think that that makes the horror a little bit more fun and exciting, less frightening, a little bit one man with 2 guns fighting demons, right? There's a deeper psychological layer to it as well that I'm hoping that readers will pick up on, which is this concept of perception. And are these demons real? Is the way that he sees the reality true? And that can also be frightening, to have your worldview and your perspective on life be thrown into question. I thought that that was an interesting, nuanced piece as well that people may or may not pick up on if you're reading or if you're watching this interview and you read the book. Hopefully you will, because now I've kind of prompted it. But like that's what I'm kind of trying to layer into the story a little bit as well is this concept of there's, yes, demonic horror, there are monsters in the book, but then there's also this psychological horror component gives it, I think, a little bit more depth and a little bit more nuance.
I'm just curious though, because the fact that you, of course, are a father, you have two children, and the fact that you've been writing for over 20 years here, some of your real life must have seeped into your writing of this particular series because, one doesn't live a life of chaos and not pick up a few things here and there from real life and throw it into the book.
You've just outed my secret. I do moonlight as a hitman for hire.
Oh, sorry. Jeez.
Uh, yeah, no, I'm kidding. No, it's somebody once described to me that being a parent is never getting a good night's sleep again in your life. And again, that plays into a role with Andres, who should be haunted by nightmares and stuff, but sleeps fairly soundly because he believes he's on a crusade. He believes he's ridding the world of evil, and as that starts to get called into question, his life starts to unravel. His worldview is unraveling around him. My journey as a parent has not been dissimilar. I mean, I love my kids, but yes, they keep me up at night, and there are moments of frustration and stress as there are with any parents. As a writer, we tend to focus on what are the nuances that we pick up, what are the observations that we're making of the human condition, and how do we apply those to character. And so picking up on those negative aspects of parenting and then applying those to, again, somebody who has to operate at peak efficiency became an interesting element within this story. Yet simultaneously, like, there's so much love there with kids. And I love my kids unconditionally. It's this weird phenomenon where I would throw myself into traffic without hesitation to protect them. How often can you say that about anything in our lives? And there's just, they'll go from having a tantrum 1 minute to being all happy and smiles the next. They're very chaotic neutrals, the way I kind of like to describe it. But there's a bit of a manicness to the way kids are because they haven't developed those nuanced social skills yet, right? They're kids. I mean, my kids are 5 and 7. The kid that's in this story is 5 years old as well. And there are a couple of moments that I did extract exactly from my life, like when he has to babysit Tony, when Andres has to babysit Tony for the very first time, and Tony's like, "This is not the mac and cheese that the way mommy makes it," and he's like making a mess and stuff. And you get that, like that absolutely happens. And the kid's not doing it to be malicious. It's just they like it a particular way. They want it that way, and this is the only way that they know how to communicate that at this point. But Andres, who's never been around kids, right, does not necessarily understand that and is pulling his hair out, almost literally trying to appease this child who is much more difficult for him to handle than any of the demons that he has to fight within the story. So those moments again are a little bit lifted from real life, but up to the nth degree to be more comical and to be more entertaining than they are in real life. But simultaneously, when he is in a situation where he is about to be defeated, when Andres is overpowered and these demons are coming at him, what are those points of motivation that keep him going? And as somebody who would be a bachelor who's just on this crusade, is this crusade enough to keep you going? And so the way that I like to think about this particular story is Andres has to make a choice between which is more important, ridding the world of evil or protecting the people that he loves. And as this story is progressing, he moves from one to the other and finds that that power of love is more powerful and able to help him overcome seemingly impossible situations that he wouldn't otherwise be able to get out of.
You have an amazing team around you with this series here. I just love the fact that you have an international team. You've all put together an amazing series so far. But what was a piece of artwork you got back, especially after a 7-year hiatus, that was just way better than what you actually received previously? This is just incredible.
It's interesting because when we originally did the series, the publisher that we were working with wanted kind of like a PG-13 vibe to it. And Francisco being Italian, like PG-13 is something very different over there. So like we would say things like no nudity, and then the characters would go to a brothel, and then he would draw a bunch of topless women. And I'm like, no, we got to cover that up. Like we got to cut that out. Or he had like a demon that wasn't wearing any pants. And like, we got Demon Dong on the page. It was like, we got to put that demon in a kilt or something, man, because we can't, that's not PG-13. It just meant something very, very different. And so we would send these images in that I was like, we can't use these. And we had to edit them in the original cut. We've changed those in this version. So the first issue is now kind of the uncut version of the story. And we just decided to embrace that R rating, that mature reader's rating. And I was like, look, if you want to draw naked demons, like by all means, whatever you want to do. I'll kind of describe like the demon's personality and what the demon kind of needs to do and why the demon does what they're doing. And then I'll just kind of hand it off to Francisco and let him go nuts on the design. And he'll come back with just these really fun and interesting ways for these demons to look. And he doesn't always design them in advance. Sometimes he'll just design them on the page. And that becomes really exciting for me when I get that artwork in, to see how does this creature look, because I had an idea in my head of what might be there, and then he'll come back with something. I'll be like, hold on a second, I need to rewrite a little something in the story because I want to take advantage of this design that you've made. So it becomes fun and collaborative, but it's not necessarily done in advance. It's like improv. We just kind of keep saying yes and back and forth to each other, and it becomes this fun collaborative process over and over again, and it just keeps feeding the creativity that both of us have in there. I mean, he and I have a messenger feed going back and forth because he'll send me stuff and I'll be like, oh yeah, it's really cool, or no, wait, have you thought about this, maybe the horn should look like this thing, and I'll send him like a picture of an animal, right? Like it just gets really fun and interesting, and heaven forbid anyone ever sees that messenger string because it would be bizarre. For me, it's so much fun, and then he just gets really excited about having a longer story allows him to explore more of the backstory of some of these reoccurring characters, and he gets really excited about that too. He really likes the idea that we can flesh out Andres as character versus keeping him a little bit more surface level and a little bit more one note like we had to do in the original single issue story. But to answer the question around like any one particular piece of artwork, I would say anytime that he's designing a monster on page is just awesome and amazing. And then whenever I give him like a location, like you haven't gotten to this yet, but the last issue of this first graphic novel, there is an action sequence in there that basically lasts like the whole issue, and it's amazing and awesome, and it's a lot faster paced than any of the previous issues that we had done in the series. And Francisco was just firing on all cylinders when it came to that issue. And every page that he turned back just became more and more jaw dropping every time I got in. So I'm hoping that as people are turning those pages while they're reading this graphic novel, they're going to have a similar reaction that I had when I was looking at my inbox saying, oh man, this is sweet. Oh, damn, that happens. Oh, shit. Like, and they'll go off. So that's a long answer to your short question once again. But again, like this is the stuff that excites me and the stuff that I'm hoping will excite the readers.
That was the one thing I noticed. It was the monster design. It was the character designs that were coming in, because usually a lot of times if an artist gets into a groove or whatever, they kind of just stay with the same color, the same design, the same style. The fact that there was different shades of horns, different shades of body types. There was such a huge variety. And it was just like, I don't know if I were to pick a favorite demon or whatever, I don't know if I could. It just comes, you need a top 10 list of favorite demons ranked from F to S or something like that.
I'll be curious to see if fans and readers put that together, right? Especially as they start to go into volume 2, because volume 2's got even more monsters and more nuances and more fun stuff. And not all the monsters that Andres fights look monstrous. And so that becomes kind of fun too, right? Like some of the subtleties of the monster reveals versus the more over the top monsters that he battles throughout the series. So we like the variety. We like to put in a lot of different kinds of designs. And for me, an open invitation to Francisco, go nuts. What do you want to draw here, man? As wild and crazy and over the top as you want, or as subtle and difficult to kind of see as you want, go for it. And that's how I like to work with my artists. I like to sit there and give them that option, right? Like, what do you want to draw? Let's put that on the page.
It's interesting. You've done Kickstarter campaigns. I think this is your first Zoop campaign, if I recall, or at least the first that we've conversed on. Why Zoop this time around? I'm kind of curious.
It's an excellent question. My last Kickstarter campaign was for Albert the Alien Volume 4, which happened in 2018. So, two things. One, the world of crowdfunding has changed dramatically since that time. We've gone through a pandemic. There have been new capabilities out there. The indie comic scene has changed and innovated a lot since my last Kickstarter campaign. And while this book has been done for a while, like I just kind of sat on it because I was a little nervous to pull the trigger because it was such a departure from what I had written before. And I didn't know how much of my previous audience would translate over into it because again, that was a kid's book, and this is definitely not a kid's book. At the same time, I really liked what Zoop was doing within the crowdfunding space. As somebody who hasn't done crowdfunding in a while, there are a lot of steps and processes that people who haven't done one before are probably unaware of. You're constantly marketing and talking about the thing. You've got to do fulfillment when it's done. You've got to find a printer. You've got to make sure that you're getting through customs if you're printing overseas, or dealing with any kind of shipping issues as you're getting out either the books in or getting the books out to readers. Zoop covers all of that. They actually do the entire campaign for you. And for me, as somebody who hadn't done a campaign in 4 or 5 years, that was refreshing to know that there was kind of a team to back me up. It wasn't just all on me. And they had suppliers and partners that they could introduce me to that would help us with things like printing, if we wanted to do special stuff to the book itself, if we wanted to do like spot gloss, or if we wanted to do particular textures within, we're going to do a deluxe hardcover. If we ended up doing any kind of textures in the deluxe hardcover, like they would help with all of those steps. And that helps me to focus more on the writing and the story, and allows them to kind of do a lot of the fulfillment and campaign piece. So I really like that element. At the same time, I had a couple of friends that had also launched campaigns on Zoop that were very successful. They had nothing but positive things to say about the Zoop team. I also, so far, have had a very positive experience working with the people over at Zoop. And then the final piece that pushed me over the edge on them was a recommendation. So one of my friends who's an editor, Heather Antos, I had been talking to her about crowdfunding and saying like, well, who are you excited about in the space right now? Like, who do you really like? And where are you kind of looking when it comes to new books coming out? And she made introductions. I was very, very blessed to have that happen. I've had an extremely positive experience working with them for the past couple of months, and I'm really excited to see what happens when we end up launching this thing on May 21st. So,
when does this campaign start? Because I'm sure you're excited about getting this into the hands and into the masses there.
yeah, 100%. Assuming nothing changes, because we're recording this before that date, May 21st is when this campaign will launch. And I just found out yesterday something that has not been announced yet, but I will tell you, and therefore I will tell all of your readers. We are also going to have a Zoop exclusive cover from my friend Ben Templesmith.
Oh, wow.
Ben is going to do a cover for Los Ojos Volume 1. So the cover that you saw that you put up earlier is the Francesco cover that we will have available. I mean, we'll bring that one to cons. But if people want to get the Ben Templesmith cover, you got to back it on Zoop.
Ben's an incredible artist, like top notch, amazing. How did that come about?
So I've known Ben for a couple of years, and we have a lot of mutual friends. And at conventions, whenever we are together, we will try to grab dinner or drinks together. And I just casually mentioned, hey, I'm doing my first horror Kickstarter, looking to see if there might be additional rewards or exclusives that we can kind of offer on there. Would you be willing to do a cover? And if so, how much? And, he gave me a quote. It sounded fair and reasonable. And I just sent him the book, and he's reading it this weekend, and he's going to start working on the cover. So within the next 2 weeks or so, we should hopefully have like a couple of drafts for what that cover is going to look like, and then it'll be done before the campaign ends. So we'll be able to upload that as an update to people, so everyone gets a chance to see what it looks like. But I'm a big fan of Ben's, and again, he's been an incredible friend of mine for the last several years. Francisco, my artist, is a huge fan of Ben's, and so this was like when I think horror artist in the comic book space, the first name that comes to mind for me is Ben Templesmith. So that was again a very exciting coincidence.
What levels, what perks do we have? What do we have available for those that are going to back this campaign other than this amazing book here?
So the book will be available both digital copy and deluxe hardcover. You can also get a signed copy of it from me. We will have these exclusive Ben Templesmith covers that we just talked about. We're also going to have a very limited supply of either sketches or commissions from Francisco. So whatever character you want him to kind of sketch or whatever character you want, like a full commission of, he will have a limited supply of those available. I guarantee you those are going to sell out by, if not the first day, certainly by the end of the first week, because there's just not a lot of those open and available. If you tell him to draw Silverhawks, you will become his new best friend. He loves Silverhawks. So we'll have access to those, and then digital add-ons. We're still working through some of the add-ons that we will have, but we will definitely have the ability to get my entire catalog and library of additional books that are available. So the entire Albert the Alien series, both digitally and physically, any of the new books that I have been working on, including some of the additional mature readers books that I've been working on, you'll be able to get the first issue of those, definitely digitally, if not physically. And then my new young adults series, The Witches of Eastwick Boulevard, which is kind of like a superhero, supernatural story that's got a manga style to it. It's a really cool kind of nuanced story. And then for the horror lovers out there, Demon City, which is the next horror book that I'll end up funding once Los Ojos is done, which is like a crime noir murder mystery set in the apocalypse. Yeah, so that one will be fun as well. A different Italian artist working on that series, but so all of these will be available as rewards and add-ons throughout the campaign. And then we're looking to see, and honestly, I would ask your readers too, like, what do you want to see? Do you want to see book plates? Do you want to see posters? Do you want to see bookmarks? Like, let us know, and we can probably make some of those things happen. Personally, whenever I back a campaign, like the merchandise and tchotchkes are not necessarily the big attractor to me. But if people want stickers and pins and that, like, we can certainly make that happen, because again, Zoop's got the resources that I don't necessarily have to some of those vendors. And we've got a stellar cast of art from either the book or original stuff that we can get Francisco to make quite quickly to be a part of that campaign.
It almost sounds like, and I'm not saying you're targeting Italian artists, but it almost sounds like you want to take a trip to Italy, go to a Comic Con in Italy, take the family with you, and just like have a fun experience and live life.
I'm not going to lie, it would be a tax write-off. So because it's a business expense. But no, Italy would be a lot of fun. I don't know why I have found so many Italian artists lately. I just keep finding them on social media. But in fairness, like, my Nexus Point artist lives over in Spain. My Repossessed artist lives in China. My Witches artist lives in Canada. So I do work with artists from kind of all around the world. I'm working with another artist right now down in Argentina. So I try to diversify as much as I can, but I also just think that there's a very strong art scene over in Italy. Not to say that it doesn't exist any other place. It's just that's what the algorithms have been pushing my way. I have just had very positive experiences working with the artists that I've had a chance to work with so far.
I want to see Trevor Mueller world tour, going to like every artist town or city or comic convention. I want to see like around the world with Trevor in 80 days or something like that. Like I'd love to see that as like a series of some kind.
I used to do a lot of world traveling before I had kids when I was over in marketing. I did have a chance to visit a number of countries that I otherwise never would have gotten a chance to see. One of them actually gets featured in Los Ojos, because one of the characters is living over in Singapore. And we had regional offices over in Singapore. And Singapore was such a lovely country and such a lovely experience to visit and to go to. And I'm sure to live there would be magical. I mean, it's like utopia. It's Gattaca. It is this, this diamond in the rough. It is such a beautiful place to be, and certainly to visit. And so I wanted to make sure that one of the characters was kind of featured there. And a lot of the coworkers I had there actually weren't even from Singapore. Like, because there's such an international business hub there within that country, you'll get a lot of people from Australia or from Europe or from Russia or from all over the world that just so happen to be set up there to do business throughout the rest of Southeast Asia. And that made sense as well for this particular character in Los Ojos, because that international reach and that international access became a very easy thing for them to do within the job that they do. I don't want to spoil it for people, but that was one of the reasons why we picked Singapore, was because I'd been there. It was lovely, and I wanted to feature some of those iconic locations within this series. What we're trying to offer is, like, people who want to read, cool, you got the book. People who like art, cool, you've got commissions and sketches. People who want like original, unique stuff you can get on there, we've got this Ben Templesmith cover. Like, that's kind of been my approach to it. And then, yeah, if you want additional rewards and tchotchkes above and beyond that, like, we can make them. Like that's not usually what excites me about a campaign. And that's why I just haven't focused on them or put them into the initial launch of rewards that we have. There's nothing wrong with them. And there's a lot of audience out there that likes those additional add-ons.
Out of the thousands of people I'm sure you have on your mailing list, like 5% might like buttons or whatever. It's just like, okay.
Well, the button isn't going to be the pushing point to get them to back the campaign. Like whenever we reached out on the Albert books too, and we were asking about like bonus material in the back of the book or things that they wanted for rewards, they just kept saying more story.
Yeah.
And so that's why the back of the Albert books keeps having all these short stories from guest artists, because that way Gabe and I could focus on the main story. And then we could also include like these cool nuanced stories. And I could also play with and get acquainted with new creators and give them an opportunity to tell a story or to work with me on a story within the Albert the Alien universe. We're not doing that with Los Ojos because there's no backup stories. It's just the main story. Like if I were to ask the question to the readers that I have and the subscribers that I have, what do you want to see in this campaign? The answer that I've always gotten back is more story. And so that's why I was like, all right, well, we'll make sure there's a volume 2. You know?
Do you think you'd have a spin-off series with some of the characters, the clown-faced woman? Could you see that as a spin-off series?
Potentially. After volume 2 comes out, I think that you'll start to see a little bit more of the world that we've kind of built here and what's going on with it. And there are a lot of spin-off stories that could be done within that world. Simultaneously, there's the 2 FBI characters that are hunting Andres, right? They pick up on that trail at the end of the very first issue. That was always a component of the original story. And they play a much bigger role in this new story as well. Further adventures of those 2 investigating cool supernatural stuff like a Sam and Twitch, right, from the Spawn universe, could be an interesting spin-off to do as well. So the short answer is yes. There's a lot of stories that we can and could tell when we are done with this one. Whether I do it with Francisco, whether I do it with other artists, whether we do it at all, I think kind of depends on if there is demand for it. Because if people are asking for more, then I'm happy to give more. If people are satisfied with what they get in the tales that we are ready to tell, then that's also fine and dandy.
I was going to ask about the reality versus the supernatural in here, and I don't know if this is spoiler territory or not. Is that spoiler territory thinking that there's a fine line between, say, madness and reality?
I don't think that there's a fine line. I think that madness is much more interesting from a story and narrative perspective. But I think it's an easy thing to do in a story like this. And I don't like to lean towards what's easy. I like to keep readers guessing because that also forces me to, again, flex those muscles and try something a little bit different. But it also forces me to come up with, well, if crazy is the thing that people expect, then what can I throw them that is unexpected? What can we do that is more nuanced? And even with the original story where I had long editorial talks with the publisher that was putting this together about, well, how much do we want to lead the readers down a particular path? Do we want them to believe that Andres' POV is true? Or do we want them to believe that reality is reality and Andres is seeing things that don't exist or things that do not exist the way that he sees them? We had a lot of discussions around those things. And my goal with the original story was to keep it ambiguous. My ambitions with this story is to make it less ambiguous, is what I will say. If volume 1 gets funded, you'll find out more in volume 2. I haven't written the finale just yet.
Okay.
I know how it's going to end. The question is how much of what I know is going on do I want to throw in there versus how much are readers really enjoying the opportunity to interpret what's going on.
Fan engagement, reader engagement is always important, especially when it comes to comics. And you've had a good couple of decades in regards to fan interactions when it comes to this here. For those that have seen this series, other than myself and those that you've read this, what has been their reaction, of course, to the series? And have they offered their honest opinions about it?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to think that whenever people talk to me, they are speaking open and honestly. I would return that courtesy in kind. The original story of Los Ojos did get printed previously. And it sold extremely well. And it sold so well that they did not only a single issue of it, but they ended up putting it into an anthology called Omega Comics Presents. All the other stories in there were like 8 pages, and ours was 25 pages. Like it was a massive story within that anthology, and something that whenever people hear that it's John Wick meets John Constantine, it's about a man with guns fighting demons, like there's action and horror and all kinds of thriller moments in there, like people got really interested in it. And we had press releases and reviews and stuff from that original piece that were exactly what we were going for. Like they would sit there and they would say this story was predictable until it wasn't, and then I had to go back and reread it, and then I picked up on what the nuances were, and suddenly this became much more interesting. And so the goal was, can we continue that streak through this story? Can we continue to keep people, like make people think they know what's going on, and then throw them a curveball where we reveal, oh no, that's not actually what's happening, and keep them guessing, keep them on their toes, and keep them hinting enough at what's kind of happening so that they're interested, but then always pleasantly surprised whenever they find out that something different may be happening, or when they get confirmation on what they thought was happening was indeed true. That's what we were really kind of trying to do with this story. So I also did a limited print run of that original series, that original book, that single issue story leading up to this graphic novel. And I did it as a bit of a pulse check to sit there and say, hey, if I'm pitching this book out to people at conventions, is there interest? Are people buying this book? Outside of the Witches of Eastwick Boulevard, it was my number one seller. Wow. By far. I mean, people really liked this idea about man fighting demons, whether they be physical or personal, right? Like, and everyone, I think, has their own demons that they have at home, and some people deal with them and some people lock them up and some people try to ignore those demons. And so when we sit there and we talk about monsters, when we sit there and we talk about demons, sometimes we talk about them physically, sometimes we talk about them psychologically, and sometimes we talk about them spiritually. Those are some of the layers that we try to throw into this story. And when I get those feedback from people who, like, you know, buy it on a Friday at a convention, come back on a Saturday, because I always ask, like, hey, if you read it, like, come back, tell me what you think. They sat there and they're like, when's the next one? When do I get more? This is the next one. This is the more. This is Los Ojos, what you've already read in that first issue if you bought it, or if you haven't read it, it's there. But now it's in color, it's enhanced, it's unedited. And we have also added in the rest of the story that leads into this broader tale that we want to tell with these characters. This is it. This is the more. This is, if you wanted it, this is what it is. And I think that horror is very popular. And I think that action sells really well. And you pair the two together, and that sounds like peanut butter and jelly to me. And I enjoy good PBJ. I'm just saying.
Crust on or off?
For my kids, crust off. For me, toasted.
There you go. No.
I like the texture.
Yeah. We could keep going, obviously, about your character design and your development and everything like that. We know the campaign is currently ongoing by the time of this release here. Is there anything I haven't touched on other than, you know, where we can find you and how we can support you? Because I always love supporting your work here. And I hope people that watch these interviews and see these shows and listen to them in the future, I hope they continue to support your work as well.
Yeah, I appreciate your ongoing support, Kurt. Thank you for being such an advocate, not just for me, but for indie comic creators in general. Like, it's very much a community. You'll get those people that think of it as like a competition, and I'm very much in the mindset that it is a community. Like, we support each other. When one of us succeeds, we all succeed, whether our campaigns succeed or not, right? Like, indie comics continue to innovate, continue to tell really fun and unique stories, and continue to dispel a level of talent and sophistication and storytelling and visuals and coloring techniques that continue to, like, the big two will take notice. The big two see those things, and that's why those people will start to get brought on to bigger books. I mean, look at Robert Kirkman, right? Like, he started off as nobody, and then The Walking Dead and Invincible and so many other wins under his belt, an executive producer of those, not just the creator, and being able to showcase that you can wear multiple hats as these indie creators. That success would not be possible without the support of people like yourself and your listeners and all those. So from the bottom of my heart, truly, like, thank you so much for that support. The biggest thing that you can do is to obviously help support the campaign is to back it. But simultaneously, if money is tight, I understand that people's budgets may not necessarily be as robust as they have been in the past. Sharing that the campaign exists, that it's something that you're interested in, that you know somebody might be interested in it, and telling them about it or sharing the link or any of that stuff goes miles, because we're going to be talking about this for at least the next 30 days while the campaign is going. And it is so helpful for them to tag us or to talk to us or to share us and help us get that word out to, even if it's not up your alley, right? Somebody that you know who might be interested in an action horror kind of series. To that regard, right? My online social media is Trevor A. Mueller on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, on every single website, Blue Sky, Threads, find me, follow me, friend me. And then I have a newsletter that you can also join at trevoramueller.com/newsletter, where I talk about other projects that I'm doing. And again, I like to have something on my table for everyone. So even if Los Ojos is not necessarily for you, chances are I either got a book that is, or I've got a book that's coming out that will be. The support, I would say, directly, right? Obviously, if you can pledge, please do. If you can't pledge, please share. And if you want to hear more about what I've got going on with Los Ojos or other projects, definitely make sure that you're following me on social media and or signed up for that newsletter.
Well, Trevor, I always appreciate you coming on the show. I still believe in the next 10 years that you and Dirk are still going to be neck and neck, to the point that I may have to break out the golden Canadian jacket for your 10th to 15th interviews back to back with you guys there. So I'll have to get your width and your length there when it comes to jacket sizes, and we'll go from there.
Counterpoint, what if we just keep doing interviews and leave Dirk in the dust?
Hey, you know me, I'm always up for some friendly competition in that respect, because content from either of you is amazing, and I always appreciate you guys coming on the show, because there's always something new that I learn, and I hope that people that watch and listen to these interviews learn more about yourself as not only a creative person, but maybe you're inspiring them down an amazing creative path that I'm sure you have. So I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and 1,200 plus others on our website, tgtmedia.com or twogeekstalking.com. That's TWO. The website's going through a huge revamp, so if that's not active or updated, go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGTmedia. Want to get Trevor's past interviews? Go to twogeekstalking.podbean.com or just search Two Geeks Talking wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to bring that out. Thanks for listening and watching on Two Geeks Talking.
Thank you so much.